Welcome to Hidden Truths, the channel that dares to ask the questions you were never meant to ask. Here we uncover the secrets behind the systems that shape your life, money, power, society, and expose the truths hidden in plain sight. Today's topic will challenge one of the deepest beliefs you've carried your entire life. You've been told there's not enough to go around, that scarcity is natural, unavoidable, and permanent. But what if I told you this shortage isn't an accident? What if the system manufactures scarcity, not to protect resources, but to keep you desperate, obedient, and dependent? In this video, you'll discover how governments, corporations, and markets deliberately restrict supply, why they need you to believe the myth of limited resources, and how to break free from the scarcity script that's been written for you. Because the truth is, there's enough for everyone. They just don't want you to have it. Cold open and the shock. You've been told a story since you were a child. A story that shapes the way you see the world. A story repeated in classrooms, on television, in political speeches, in news headlines, and even in conversations at your family dinner table. The story is simple. There is not enough to go around. Not enough food, not enough water, not enough jobs, not enough money, not enough opportunities. And because this story has been told so many times, in so many ways, you've accepted it as the truth. It's not even something you question anymore. It's just how the world is. You see empty shelves in the supermarket. You hear about droughts and famine on the news. You watch friends work 2 or 3 jobs just to stay afloat. You scroll past headlines about fuel shortages, housing crises, and the cost of living emergency. Everywhere you look, you see the same message reflected back to you. There isn't enough. And when you see it enough times, you believe it. But what if it's not true? Here's a thought you may have never considered. What if the shortage you see around you is not a natural disaster? What if it's not simply the result of bad luck or poor planning, or the inevitable limits of our planet? What if much of it is by design? Let that sink in, because if that's true, it changes everything. If scarcity is manufactured, then it's not just an unfortunate reality you have to live with. It's a system you're trapped inside. Why would anyone create scarcity? To answer that, you need to understand a basic truth about human nature. People who are desperate are easier to control. Think about it. If you are 1 paycheck away from losing your home, you'll accept lower pay and longer hours without complaint. If you are told that medicine is rare and in short supply, you'll empty your savings without hesitation to get it. If you are convinced that jobs are scarce, you won't negotiate your salary. You'll just be grateful for whatever you're offered. Scarcity is not just about the lack of resources. Scarcity is about the lack of options. And when people have fewer options, those in power have more control. The world has more than you think. Let me give you some uncomfortable facts. The world produces enough food each year to feed every single person on the planet, and then some. Yet, according to the United Nations, over 828 million people go hungry every year. How is that possible? There are more empty homes in many countries than there are homeless people. In the United States alone, there are estimated 16 million vacant houses, while over 500,000 people sleep on the streets every night. Pharmaceutical companies often hold life-saving drug patents for decades, charging thousands of dollars per dose, even though the cost to produce the drug might be less than a few dollars. If the resources exist, then the question is not, why is there not enough? The real question is, who decided you shouldn't have it? The silent script you're living in. The shortage you see isn't always an accident. Sometimes it's a script, and that script has been rehearsed for decades, even centuries. In this script, scarcity plays the leading role, and the supporting cast includes governments that limit access to land, licenses, and resources, corporations that destroy perfectly good products to keep prices high, media outlets that reinforce the idea that resources are running out, education systems that teach you competition, not collaboration, is the only way to survive. You've been told that competition is natural, that life is a constant battle for limited resources, that only the strongest survive. But what if that's just part of the narrative, one designed to keep you fighting over scraps while those at the top keep the feast? Scarcity as a psychological weapon. Scarcity is not just an economic tool, it's a psychological weapon. When you believe there's not enough, your mind switches into survival mode. In survival mode, you make short-term decisions instead of long-term plans. You accept unfair conditions because you feel you have no choice. You focus on protecting what little you have instead of growing something bigger. And here's the sinister part. Those who benefit from scarcity know exactly how the human brain works under pressure. They know fear makes you predictable. They know desperation makes you compliant. They know stress keeps you from thinking clearly. Examples you were never meant to question. Consider this. Farmers in some countries are paid to destroy crops rather than sell them to keep supply low and prices high. Tech companies deliberately design products to break after a few years, forcing you to buy again. Housing developers limit the number of new builds, even in cities desperate for affordable homes. Hospitals charge inflated prices for basic medical procedures because the shortage of beds means you have no other option. None of this is a coincidence. It's business. It's politics. It's control. The moment of realization. Here's the most dangerous truth of all. The world has enough. Enough food, enough water, enough shelter, enough knowledge, enough wealth. But enough for everyone doesn't make certain people rich, and so the system rewrites reality. It takes abundance and hides it. It takes possibility and restricts it. It takes opportunity and sells it back to you at a price you can barely afford. So the next time you hear the words, "There's just not enough," stop, think, and ask yourself, not enough for who? And who profits from me believing that? Because once you see the script, you can't unsee it. And the first step to escaping scarcity is realizing it's been manufactured all along. The myth of natural scarcity. When you hear the word scarcity, you probably imagine something like a desert, dry, barren, lifeless. Or maybe you picture empty supermarket shelves, like those panic buying scenes during a crisis. From the moment we were old enough to understand the concept of running out, we were taught that scarcity is a natural part of life. It was presented as an unavoidable law of the universe, like gravity or the change of seasons. Your teacher in school might have drawn a simple diagram on the board, a pie. This, they said, represents the world's resources. Then they drew slices of different sizes, explaining how there's only so much to go around, and if someone takes more, someone else must get less. It sounds logical. It feels fair. But here's the problem. That diagram is a lie. The schoolroom seed of limitation. Think back to your earliest lessons about economics or resources. The story always began with finite resources and ended with tough choices. You were taught that water is running out, land is running out, jobs are running out, money is running out. And because it came from authority, a teacher, a textbook, a news anchor, you never thought to question it. It became part of your worldview. But there's a huge difference between limited in theory and limited in practice. The Earth may have a finite amount of land, water, and minerals, but in reality, the limits we experience in daily life often have nothing to do with nature and everything to do with human design. Scarcity versus access. Here's a key distinction you were never taught. Scarcity is not always about the total amount of something that exists. It's about who has access to it. For example, the world grows enough grain to feed everyone on Earth, but much of it is fed to livestock for meat production in wealthy countries instead of going to hungry people. There are vast freshwater resources, but millions of people can't drink it because it's polluted, privatized, or locked behind corporate control. There is enough energy capacity through solar, wind, and other renewables to power the planet, but investments remain locked in fossil fuels to protect existing profits. In each of these cases, the problem isn't that there isn't enough. It's that the systems controlling access decide who gets it, when, and at what price. The pie is bigger than you think. That pie your teacher drew, it's not fixed. In fact, human innovation has been making the pie bigger for centuries. A few examples. Agricultural technology allows us to grow more food on less land than ever before. Advances in medicine have turned deadly diseases into preventable or treatable conditions. Renewable energy can generate more power in a single year than all the fossil fuels we have left underground. And yet, we're still told the pie is shrinking. Why? Because if you believe the pie is fixed and shrinking, you're easier to control. You'll fight for your slice instead of questioning who baked the pie in the first place and why they get the biggest pieces. The politics of not enough. Scarcity is politically convenient. If leaders can convince you there's not enough, they can justify raising prices and taxes, cutting public services, passing laws that limit access for the greater good, enforcing strict controls on resources while exempting themselves and their allies. They don't have to admit mismanagement, corruption, or greed. They simply point to the natural limits and say, our hands are tied. The role of media in selling scarcity. Turn on the news and notice how often you hear phrases like running out of time, dwindling supply, record-breaking shortage. The language is designed to trigger urgency and fear. It creates a constant sense of crisis, keeping you emotionally hooked. And while some shortages are real and worth acting on, many are exaggerated or framed without the full picture. Case in point, During certain oil crises in history, tankers full of oil were sitting offshore, deliberately withheld from the market to create the appearance of scarcity and drive prices up. The news reported historic fuel shortages, and the public panicked, never realizing the shortage was strategic, not natural. Scarcity as a social divider. When people believe there's not enough to go around, they stop looking at the system and start looking at each other. They're taking our jobs. Those people get more benefits than we do. If they win, I lose. This scarcity mindset turns neighbors into competitors, co-workers into rivals, and strangers into threats. And while the public is busy fighting each other over crumbs, those controlling the loaf keep it safe in their own hands. Nature's abundance versus man-made limits. Look around at nature. Trees produce more seeds than will ever grow into new trees. Oceans teem with life far beyond what we could consume. Rain replenishes rivers and lakes again and again. The natural world operates on a principle of abundance, cycles that renew, multiply, and overflow. It's humans, or more specifically, human systems, that impose artificial limits. A fishing quota might be set not to protect the ocean, but to keep prices high for the biggest companies. A water supply might be rationed not because there's too little, but because it's being diverted to more profitable industries. Why the myth works so well? The myth of scarcity works because it's rooted in fear. Fear of loss, fear of not surviving, fear of falling behind. Once fear takes hold, logic becomes secondary. We accept restrictions, lower standards of living, and even injustice because we're told the alternative is worse. And that is exactly where those in power want you: compliant, quiet, and resigned. Breaking the spell. The first step in breaking free from the scarcity script is recognizing the myth. Ask yourself, who benefits from me believing there's not enough? Who controls the flow of the resource I'm told is scarce? Is the problem truly a shortage or a question of access? Once you start asking these questions, the cracks in the story appear. And when you see through the myth, you stop playing the role the system wrote for you, the role of the desperate, fearful, obedient citizen. In the next part, we'll go deeper into how scarcity is used as a control mechanism and why desperate people are the most profitable and the easiest to rule. Scarcity as a control mechanism. Imagine a puppet master on a stage. The audience sees the puppets moving and believes the show is real. But every move, every gesture, every dance is controlled by the person behind the curtain. Now replace the puppets with people. Replace the stage with the world you live in, and replace the strings with scarcity. This is how control works, not with chains, not with whips, not with overt dictatorship, but with a subtle, invisible force, the belief that there's not enough. The psychology of desperation. When people are desperate, they don't rebel, they don't question, they don't resist. They focus entirely on survival, on getting through the day, the week, the month. Scarcity creates desperation, and desperation creates obedience. This isn't speculation, it's a well-documented psychological phenomenon. Studies in behavioral economics show that when humans feel a lack of resources, whether money, time, or opportunities, their decision-making narrows. They become less likely to take risks, less able to think long-term, and more willing to accept poor conditions for immediate relief. For those in positions of power, this is incredibly convenient. Control through wages. Consider the job market. If there are more jobs than workers, employees have bargaining power. They can demand higher wages, better conditions, and more benefits. But if jobs are scarce, the dynamic flips. Suddenly, workers feel lucky just to be employed. They'll tolerate stagnant wages, unsafe environments, and excessive hours because the alternative, unemployment, feels like a death sentence. This is why some economic systems are designed to maintain just enough unemployment to keep wages suppressed. It's called the reserve army of labor in economic theory, a permanent pool of people desperate for work, ready to replace anyone who complains or asks for more. Control through housing. Housing is another classic tool. When affordable homes are abundant, landlords must compete for tenants, lowering rents and improving conditions. But when housing is scarce, when there are waiting lists for months or years, the power shifts. Now landlords can raise rents without fear of losing tenants. They can neglect repairs. They can add unfair clauses to leases. A family struggling to keep a roof over their heads will endure far more mistreatment than one with plenty of options. Control through healthcare. Healthcare scarcity is perhaps the most emotionally charged. If a life-saving treatment is rare, people will bankrupt themselves to get it. If there aren't enough hospital beds, people will accept rationed care and long delays without protest. This is why some pharmaceutical companies fight to keep drug patents locked up, because a rare cure is far more profitable than a common one. The less accessible the treatment, the more desperate the patient, and the higher the price they will pay. Fear as a silent enforcer. Scarcity doesn't just control through economics, it controls through fear. Fear of losing your job, fear of not being able to pay rent, fear of being unable to afford medical care. These fears act like invisible bars on a prison cell. You might not see them, but they limit your movement all the same. When fear is constant, you live in a state of vigilance. You don't challenge authority. You don't demand justice. You stay in line, because stepping out of line could mean losing the little you have. Historical examples of scarcity as control. Ancient Rome. Grain distribution was tightly controlled by the state. By manipulating bread supply, rulers could keep the masses content or punish them into submission. The phrase bread and circuses wasn't just about distraction, it was about survival. Colonial India. During famines, British authorities often exported grain from India to other markets, while locals starved. Hunger wasn't an unavoidable disaster. It was an instrument of governance. Modern energy politics. Oil embargoes and production cuts have been used to manipulate global politics. By restricting supply, nations can pressure others into compliance without firing a single bullet. Scarcity creates competition, but not the kind you think. When resources are limited, people compete, but not always in productive ways. Instead of innovating, they fight over scraps. Instead of uniting to change the system, they turn against each other. Scarcity divides communities. It makes your neighbor your rival. It makes the poor blame the slightly less poor instead of the wealthy elite who set the rules. Why scarcity is the perfect control tool. Scarcity is self-policing. Once the belief takes hold, people enforce it on themselves and on each other. You tell yourself not to take a risk because you can't afford to fail. You discourage your children from pursuing their dreams because they need a stable job. You judge others for wanting more because they should be grateful for what they have. No law, no police, no army is needed when people have already imprisoned themselves inside the walls of scarcity thinking. Breaking down the mechanism. Here's how the scarcity control loop works. Restriction. Limit supply through regulation, policy, or artificial bottlenecks. Amplification. Use media to broadcast the shortage, increasing public fear. Submission. Desperate people accept worse deals, lower pay, and fewer rights. Extraction. Those in power profit from higher prices, cheaper labor, and greater obedience. Reinforcement. Continue feeding the narrative of natural scarcity to keep the cycle intact. It's elegant, it's invisible, and it's devastatingly effective. The illusion of choice. One of the most effective aspects of scarcity control is the illusion of choice. You might think you're free to choose your job, your home, your health care, but in reality, your options have been pre-filtered by the limits of scarcity. Sure, you can choose between two apartments, but both are overpriced because the supply of housing has been deliberately restricted. Sure, you can choose between two job offers, but both pay poorly because wages have been systematically suppressed. Scarcity ensures that no matter which option you choose, the system still wins. The cost of compliance. Living under scarcity control has a cost, not just financially, but emotionally and psychologically. It erodes trust in others. It kills creativity. It fosters anxiety and depression. When every decision is framed as a trade-off in a world of not enough, your life becomes smaller. You dream less. You take fewer risks. You settle for less than you deserve. Why this matters to you? This isn't just an abstract theory. You're living it right now. Every price you pay, every job you take, every opportunity you miss, they're all shaped by the invisible hand of scarcity, not the natural kind, but the manufactured kind. And the longer you accept it as normal, the longer it will last. In the next part, we'll explore economic engineering, the step-by-step methods governments and corporations use to create artificial shortages, keep prices high, and maintain control without you even realizing it's happening. Economic engineering. If scarcity is the puppet string that controls society, then economic engineering is the hand that pulls those strings. Scarcity doesn't just happen in a modern economy. It is often designed with surgical precision using tools of policy, regulation, and market manipulation. And the most effective designs are the ones you never even notice. What is economic engineering? Economic engineering is the deliberate shaping of markets, prices, and access to resources, not for the benefit of the majority, but to maintain the power and profits of a small group. It's about creating artificial limits on things that are naturally abundant or could easily be abundant with better distribution. Instead of allowing the natural laws of supply and demand to benefit society, economic engineering bends those laws to serve an agenda. The principle behind it: control the flow, control the power. In most markets, whoever controls the flow of goods and services controls everything. It's not always about owning the most. It's about controlling when, how, and to whom something is available. Think of it like controlling a dam. If you own the dam, you don't have to own every drop of water in the river. You just decide how much flows downstream. You can release more to appear generous or restrict the flow to create thirst and desperation. Tactic 1. Restricting supply. One of the oldest and most common forms of economic engineering is simply limiting how much of something is available, even when more could be produced. Examples: housing permits. In many cities, local governments issue far fewer building permits than needed to meet demand. This keeps housing scarce and prices high, benefiting developers and landlords. Agricultural destruction. Farmers are sometimes paid to destroy crops to maintain market stability. In reality, this prevents prices from falling and keeps food expensive, even if people are going hungry. Energy production cuts. Oil-producing nations have historically cut production during times of political tension, driving up prices worldwide, triggering an energy crisis that reshaped economies. Tactic number 2. Regulatory bottlenecks. Sometimes scarcity isn't created by reducing supply directly, but by adding so many rules and requirements that only a few players can participate. Examples: licensing systems that make it prohibitively expensive or time-consuming for small businesses to enter certain markets. Complex patent laws that keep life-saving medications in the hands of a few corporations, preventing affordable generic versions. Import restrictions that limit competition, allowing domestic producers to keep prices inflated. These bottlenecks are often sold to the public as quality control or safety measures, but their effect is the same: fewer suppliers, higher prices. Tactic number 3: price fixing and market cartels. In a truly free market, prices adjust according to supply and demand, but in reality, powerful companies often collude, directly or indirectly, to keep prices at profitable levels. Examples: major airlines raising ticket prices simultaneously after one company announces an increase, despite fuel prices dropping. Tech companies agreeing not to undercut each other's pricing, locking customers into inflated costs. Pharmaceutical giants lobbying to prevent cheaper drug imports from other countries. Tactic number 4: planned obsolescence. Another way to engineer scarcity is to make products that don't last. If your phone, laptop, or appliance breaks down after just a few years, you're forced to buy again, even though technology exists to make these products last much longer. This isn't accidental. It's called planned obsolescence, and it keeps demand artificially high while ensuring a constant stream of revenue for manufacturers. Tactic number 5: financial gatekeeping. Even if resources exist, access to them can be controlled through financial systems. Examples: banks tightening lending criteria so fewer people can qualify for mortgages, keeping home ownership out of reach for many. Credit scoring systems that punish those already struggling, making borrowing more expensive and trapping people in debt. Universities raising tuition far beyond inflation, making higher education feel like a privilege instead of a public good. The illusion of natural market forces. Here's the genius and the danger of economic engineering. It hides behind the language of natural market forces. When prices rise or goods become scarce, you're told it's because of inflation, supply chain disruptions, or global demand. And while these factors sometimes play a role, they often mask the deliberate actions taken to create the shortage in the first place. This is why so many people blame abstract forces, like the economy, instead of asking who is pulling the levers behind the scenes. Historical examples of economic engineering. The Great Depression in 1930s. While millions starved, farmers in the U.S. destroyed crops and slaughtered livestock to prop up prices. OPEC oil embargo in 1973. A political decision to cut oil supply sent global prices skyrocketing, triggering an energy crisis that reshaped economies. Diamond industry control. For decades, a single company controlled the majority of the diamond trade, releasing limited quantities to keep prices artificially high, despite large stockpiles. Why it works so well. Economic engineering works because most people never see the full supply picture. If the shelves are empty, they assume there's nothing in the warehouse. If prices are high, they assume costs have gone up. If housing is unaffordable, they assume it's because too many people want to live in the same place. Without transparency, the public can't connect the dots between policy, corporate strategy, and their own struggles. The feedback loop. Economic engineering also creates a feedback loop. Scarcity drives prices up. Higher prices increase profits for those in control. Those profits are used to lobby for more rules, policies, and market structures that maintain scarcity. It's a self-reinforcing cycle, And breaking it requires more than just consumer choice, it requires systemic change. How this affects you personally. If you've ever paid more rent than you can afford because there were no cheaper options, bought a replacement product because the old one broke too soon, waited months for medical treatment because there aren't enough doctors, seen prices rise in your city while your income stays the same, you felt the effects of economic engineering. The bridge to what comes next. Understanding economic engineering is only step one. In the next part, we'll look at political gatekeeping, the laws, policies, and government structures that give legitimacy to manufactured scarcity and ensure that challenging it is nearly impossible. Political gatekeeping. If economic engineering is the blueprint for scarcity, political gatekeeping is the fence that keeps you from climbing over it. Scarcity alone isn't enough to maintain control. People are resourceful. Given enough freedom, they will find ways around shortages, sharing, innovating, creating alternatives. That's why systems of power don't just limit supply, they legislate it, they police it, they codify scarcity into law so that breaking free from it is not only difficult, but illegal. The role of political gatekeeping. Political gatekeeping is the process by which governments, lawmakers, and regulatory bodies create, enforce, and protect rules that benefit the few, often at the expense of the many. It's not just about passing laws, it's about creating an entire legal and bureaucratic ecosystem designed to restrict who can access key resources, protect monopolies and cartels from competition, punish or discredit those who attempt to work outside the system. How laws legitimize scarcity. The most effective form of control isn't raw force. It's making people believe the system is fair, even when it's rigged. By framing restrictions as necessary regulations or public safety measures, political gatekeepers can make scarcity look like a reasonable consequence of good governance. For example, limiting fishing rights to protect the ecosystem, while granting the largest quotas to industrial fishing fleets owned by political allies. Imposing strict building codes that make it nearly impossible for small developers to create affordable housing, while luxury projects sail through approval. Extending patents on life-saving drugs far beyond their original term under the guise of protecting innovation, keeping prices sky high. The revolving door between politics and business. One of the reasons political gatekeeping works so seamlessly is because the line between politics and corporate power is often blurred, sometimes non-existent. The same individuals who write the laws may later join the boards of the corporations that benefit from them. The same corporations may fund campaigns in exchange for favorable legislation. This revolving door ensures that policies are written not for the public good, but for the preservation of economic power in the hands of a select few. Licensing and permits. Legalized exclusion. Licensing is often presented as a way to ensure quality and safety, and in some cases it is. But in many industries, licensing requirements are deliberately complex, expensive, and time-consuming, effectively locking out smaller players. For example, a small food vendor might need to pay thousands in fees, complete endless inspections, and navigate years of bureaucracy just to open a modest shop. Independent energy producers may face impossible permit requirements to connect to national grids, ensuring that only big utility companies can operate at scale. These rules don't just slow you down, they keep you out entirely. Censorship and narrative control. Political gatekeeping isn't limited to physical resources. It also extends to information. By controlling what people know and how they know it, gatekeepers can suppress awareness of abundance and keep the scarcity myth alive. For example, restricting public access to government reports that show surplus production in certain industries, pressuring media outlets to frame shortages as acts of nature rather than policy failures, silencing whistleblowers who expose waste, hoarding, or manipulation. When the public doesn't have the full story, they can't organize an effective response. The criminalization of alternatives. One of the most powerful tools of political gatekeeping is making alternatives illegal. Collecting rainwater for personal use is banned in some regions. Building a small home without government-approved permits can lead to demolition. Sharing medication, even in life or death situations, can result in criminal charges. These laws are framed as protecting public health or maintaining safety, but the effect is to prevent individuals from reducing their dependence on centralized systems. Historical examples of political gatekeeping. British colonial salt laws in India. For centuries, Indians were forbidden from collecting or selling their own salt, forcing them to buy it from British monopolies. Gandhi's famous Salt March was a direct act of defiance against this political gatekeeping. Prohibition in the U.S. While framed as a moral crusade, alcohol prohibition in the 1920s gave rise to black markets controlled by powerful criminal and political alliances, consolidating power rather than reducing harm. Apartheid land acts in South Africa. Laws restricted land ownership for the majority population, ensuring economic dependence on the minority ruling class. Why people accept political gatekeeping? It works because it's invisible to most people. When rules are framed as the law, people assume they must be right and necessary. Questioning them feels like breaking a social contract. Fear plays a role too. Challenging political gatekeepers can mean fines, imprisonment, loss of business licenses, or even physical danger. So people adapt. They work within the rules, even when those rules are designed to keep them struggling. How political gatekeeping protects economic engineering. Without political gatekeeping, economic engineering would be much harder to sustain. Laws protect monopolies from competition. Regulations limit the flow of new suppliers or innovators. Enforcement ensures that those who bypass the system are punished. It's a perfect partnership. Business designs the scarcity. Politics enforces it. The psychological impact of legal scarcity. There's something deeply demoralizing about knowing that the barriers you face are not natural, but legal. It makes the scarcity feel permanent. It makes change feel impossible. When people believe the law itself is against them, many stop trying altogether, which is exactly what gatekeepers want. Breaking through the gate. The first step to breaking political gatekeeping is recognizing it for what it is. Ask, who wrote this law? Who benefits from this regulation? Who loses when this restriction exists? Once you see that the law is not always synonymous with justice, you begin to imagine new possibilities. In the next part, we'll examine corporate chokeholds, the direct, day-to-day ways corporations keep scarcity alive in your life, from destroying surplus goods to designing products meant to fail. Corporate chokeholds. If political gatekeeping builds the fence, corporate chokeholds are the hands around your throat. Corporations don't just exist within the rules, they often write them. They use their size, influence, and wealth to control markets so tightly that your choices shrink to almost nothing. And in many industries, you're not just a customer, you're a captive. The nature of a chokehold. A chokehold is not about destroying you instantly. It's about controlling your oxygen, deciding exactly how much you get, and keeping you in a constant state of need. For corporations, the oxygen is products you must buy again and again, services you can't live without, technologies you depend on daily. By controlling these lifelines, corporations keep you dependent, and they profit from every breath you take. Strategy 1. Destroying surplus. When supply exceeds demand, prices should fall. That's good for consumers, but bad for corporate profits. The solution? Get rid of the surplus. Examples: fashion brands have been caught burning unsold clothes rather than donating them to protect brand value and keep prices high. Food companies throw away perfectly edible products because selling them at a discount could devalue the brand. Electronics retailers destroy returned items instead of reselling them cheaply to avoid undercutting new product prices. This isn't about waste by accident, it's about waste by design. Strategy 2. Planned obsolescence. If a product lasts too long, you won't need to buy it again soon. So corporations design them to fail. This can mean batteries sealed inside devices so you can't replace them yourself. Software updates that slow down older models, pushing you to upgrade. Parts made from weaker materials, guaranteeing breakdown after a few years. One famous example is the Phobos cartel in the early 20th century, where light bulb manufacturers agreed to limit bulb lifespans to 1,000 hours, even though longer-lasting designs already existed. Strategy 3. Exclusive control over resources. Some corporations don't just sell you products, they control the raw materials needed to make them, ensuring no one else can compete. Examples: tech giants buying up rare earth mineral mines to secure exclusive supply for electronics. Food conglomerates controlling massive seed patents, forcing farmers to buy from them every season. Water privatization deals giving corporations the rights to entire water sources, leaving locals to pay high prices for access. When they control the source, they control the market, and by extension, you. Strategy 4. Locking you into ecosystems. Corporations love to create ecosystems where you can only use their products, their services, and their accessories. A smartphone that only works fully with the same brand's laptop and earbuds. A printer that only accepts the manufacturer's ink cartridges, priced higher than luxury perfume. A subscription service that becomes essential for features you used to get for free. These ecosystems aren't about convenience, they're about dependence. Strategy 5. Price manipulation through market dominance. When a few companies control an entire market, they don't need to compete on price. They can move in lockstep. Airline ticket prices rising across all major carriers at the same time. Supermarkets increasing staple food prices despite falling wholesale costs. Ride-sharing apps raising fares simultaneously, citing market conditions. Without real competition, you're left with the illusion of choice, but every choice leads to the same inflated bill. The psychological game. Corporations understand human psychology as well as, or better than, governments. They use scarcity messaging to trigger FOMO, fear of missing out, and urgency. Limited time offer for something they could mass produce endlessly. Only 3 left in stock on online stores to push instant purchase. A new model released every year to make last year's product feel outdated. These aren't random marketing tricks. They're psychological chokeholds designed to keep you buying, even when you don't truly need to. Corporate lobbying, merging business with law. The chokehold tightens when corporations lobby governments to pass laws that protect their control. Extending patents to block generic competition. Passing right-to-repair restrictions, so you must use official service centers. Imposing import tariffs to keep cheaper foreign goods out of the market. This is how corporate chokeholds and political gatekeeping work together, One designs the scarcity, the other makes it legal. Real-world case studies. Pharmaceutical patents. A cancer drug costing less than $10 to make can sell for thousands per dose because one company holds the exclusive patent. Seed monopolies. Farmers in some countries are banned from saving seeds from one harvest to the next, forcing them to buy every planting season from the same corporation. Tech accessories. Headphone jacks removed from smartphones, making customers buy expensive wireless earbuds from the same brand. Why you don't see the chains. Corporate chokeholds work because they're normalized. You don't think twice about replacing your phone every 2 years, paying for overpriced printer ink, or signing up for multiple subscriptions because everyone else does it. When the system of dependence becomes part of everyday life, you stop seeing it as a trap. The hidden cost to society. Corporate chokeholds don't just cost you money, they cost innovation, sustainability, and resilience. Innovation stalls when corporations kill off competitors. Sustainability suffers when perfectly good goods are destroyed. Resilience declines when essential resources are concentrated in too few hands. In other words, these chokeholds make the entire society weaker while making a few people unimaginably rich. Breaking free from corporate chokeholds. Breaking free starts with awareness. Once you recognize the tactics, planned obsolescence, ecosystem lock-in, and false scarcity, you can make more deliberate choices. Support companies that offer repairability and long product lifespans. Buy from local producers instead of global conglomerates. Advocate for right to repair and anti-monopoly laws. Individually, these steps may seem small, but collectively, they weaken the chokehold. In the next part, we'll explore the illusion in media and education, how the stories you've been told since childhood make you accept scarcity as inevitable, and why changing your mindset is the first step toward changing the system. The illusion in media and education. If corporate chokeholds control your options, the illusion in media and education controls your mind. Scarcity, as powerful as it is, would not last long if people recognized it for what it was. So the system doesn't just limit your resources, it shapes your perception of reality. It teaches you, from your earliest years, to believe that shortage is natural, competition is inevitable, and abundance is a fantasy. By the time you're an adult, you don't just live inside the scarcity system, you defend it. Education, the first stage of programming. Your first exposure to the scarcity script likely came in a classroom. On the surface, school exists to prepare you for life, but hidden in its structure are lessons about your place in the economic order. From a young age, you were taught, there are limited spots at the top, so fight to get one. Grades, rankings, and test scores determine your value. Only a few deserve the best opportunities. The classroom becomes a miniature market with winners and losers. This conditions you to see life as a constant competition for limited rewards. The finite pie model. In economics class, you may have been shown a simple chart, the world's resources as a fixed pie. Your teacher explained, if one person takes a bigger slice, someone else gets less. The message is subtle but powerful. There will never be enough for everyone. You leave school believing your goal is to grab as much of the pie as you can before someone takes it. What they didn't tell you is that the pie is not fixed. Human innovation, better distribution, and cooperation can make the pie bigger, but that truth doesn't serve the scarcity system. Curriculum as a filter. Education doesn't just tell you what to think, it tells you what not to think about. You learn about supply and demand, but not about how markets can be manipulated. You learn about competition, but not about cooperation as a driver of progress. You study history's famines, but rarely the political decisions that caused them. When entire subjects are omitted, your worldview becomes one-sided, and scarcity seems like a law of nature, not a product of human design. The role of media, the perpetual crisis machine. While school plants the seed of scarcity thinking, media waters it every day. News headlines scream, record-breaking shortage of, rising costs due to limited supply. Experts warn resources running out. Even entertainment reinforces it. Movies and shows about dystopian futures often center on fights over scarce water, food, or fuel. Reality TV thrives on contestants competing for limited rewards, reinforcing the idea that winning means someone else must lose. Fear sells. Media is a business, and fear is the best product. Scarcity is fear made tangible. If you believe something essential is disappearing, you'll pay attention and pay money. A sudden shortage of a product drives frantic buying. Reports of looming crises keep you glued to the screen. And while you focus on the fear, the real story, why the shortage exists, and who benefits from it, often goes untold. How media frames scarcity. Media rarely lies outright. Instead, it frames the truth in a way that supports the scarcity narrative. For example, a headline might read, "Wheat production falls 10% this year." What it won't mention is that there's still more than enough wheat to meet global needs. The shortfall only impacts profit margins for exporters. By focusing on the drop without context, media makes abundance look like shortage. Scarcity as entertainment. It's not just news. Entertainment also normalizes scarcity. Game shows pit contestants against each other for a single prize. Survival shows glorify the struggle for limited resources. Even fictional worlds often revolve around scarcity. The kingdom with limited land, the post-apocalyptic society with dwindling food. This repetition creates an emotional association. Scarcity feels real because you see it everywhere. Education and media working together. The real genius of the system is how education and media reinforce each other. Education gives you the framework. There's not enough for everyone. Media gives you the evidence. Look, here's another shortage happening right now. By the time you're an adult, scarcity feels so obvious you don't even think to question it. And if you do, you're met with a flood of stories proving you wrong. Or so it seems. The invisible censorship. Scarcity illusions also survive through what's left unsaid. Stories of abundance, innovation, and successful resource sharing are rarely highlighted. If a community grows enough food to feed everyone, that's not news. If technology could make energy nearly free, it's framed as unrealistic or dangerous. Silence is as powerful as misinformation. What you don't hear about, you can't believe in. Why this matters to you? Your beliefs shape your actions. If you believe scarcity is natural, you accept higher prices, worse conditions, and unfair systems. You might even shame others for wanting more. And that's exactly the outcome the scarcity system wants. Cracks in the illusion. The good news is, the illusion isn't perfect. Independent journalists expose hoarding and waste. Documentaries reveal the politics behind natural shortages. Communities share resources directly, bypassing corporate control. Each time you see one of these cracks, the illusion weakens. Reclaiming your mind. Breaking free from the scarcity illusion starts with questioning every headline, every lesson, every fact you were taught. Ask, who benefits from me believing this? Is the shortage real or just relative to demand? What solutions are being ignored or hidden? When you reclaim your ability to see beyond the narrative, you take the first step toward reclaiming your power. In the next part, we'll explore psychological warfare, the science of how scarcity shapes your brain chemistry, decision-making, and behavior, making you easier to control than you ever realized. Psychological warfare. If media and education shape the story of scarcity, psychological warfare shapes the way you feel it. Scarcity is not just an economic condition, it's a state of mind. It's a mental environment that changes how you think, how you decide, and how you act. When you believe there isn't enough of money, time, opportunity, or security, your brain and body enter a very specific mode, survival mode. And once you're in survival mode, you're far easier to control. The science of scarcity and the brain. Neuroscience has shown that scarcity isn't just an idea you hold in your mind. It's an experience that rewires your brain in real time. When you feel deprived, your cortisol levels, the stress hormone, rise. Your amygdala, the brain's fear center, becomes more active. Your prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational thinking and planning, becomes less active. This means you become more emotional, more reactive, and less able to think long-term. You start prioritizing immediate relief over future benefits, even if that choice hurts you later. For example, a person struggling with bills may take a predatory payday loan at a huge interest rate just to stop the anxiety now. An employee desperate to keep their job may agree to unpaid overtime, sacrificing long-term health for short-term security. The scarcity system thrives on these short-term decisions because they keep you stuck. Tunnel vision, the cognitive trap. When your brain perceives a shortage, it locks all attention on the missing resource. If you're broke, every thought revolves around money. If you're overworked, every thought revolves around time. If you're lonely, every thought revolves around relationships. This focus feels logical, but it comes at a cost. You stop seeing the bigger picture. You miss opportunities, solutions, and connections that could help you because your mind is trapped in the tunnel. In behavioral economics, this is called the scarcity mindset, and it's been proven to reduce cognitive bandwidth, the mental RAM you have available for other tasks. Fear conditioning. Scarcity isn't just an occasional stress, it becomes a habit. When you've experienced it long enough, your brain learns to expect it. This is fear conditioning. You associate change with danger. You avoid taking risks because I can't afford to fail. You mistrust good news, assuming it won't last. Over time, even when abundance is possible, your brain behaves as if scarcity is still the rule. This is why people who grew up in poverty often struggle to spend or invest wisely, even after becoming financially secure. The scarcity wiring remains. The role of uncertainty. The system doesn't just create scarcity, it creates uncertainty. Because uncertainty is a magnifier of fear. If you knew exactly when your next paycheck was coming, you'd relax. If you knew exactly how much rent would be next year, you could plan. But when everything feels unstable, you live in a constant state of alertness. That hypervigilance is exhausting, and when you're exhausted, you're easier to manipulate. Scarcity and learned helplessness. Another weapon in the psychological arsenal is learned helplessness. If you've tried again and again to improve your situation, but keep hitting invisible walls, laws, corporate practices, bad luck, you start believing nothing you do will matter. This belief is deadly to your ambition. It's the point where the system no longer needs to force you to comply because you've given up resisting on your own. Social comparison as a control tool. Scarcity is intensified by social comparison. Media constantly shows you people who have more, more money, more beauty, more success, while subtly implying you have less. This isn't just marketing, it's psychological warfare. When you feel behind, you'll push yourself harder, accept worse deals, and prioritize catching up over questioning the system. Shame and self-blame. The final, cruelest trick of scarcity is to make you believe it's your fault. If you're struggling, it must be because you're lazy. If you're broke, it must be because you don't manage money well. If you're unhealthy, it must be because you're irresponsible. By internalizing the blame, you stop looking at systemic causes and start punishing yourself instead. This shame keeps you quiet, compliant, and unwilling to unite with others who are suffering. How psychological warfare sustains the system. Scarcity isn't just a shortage of resources, it's a shortage of mental freedom. Once your mind is conditioned to believe there's not enough, you compete instead of collaborate. You comply instead of challenge. You react instead of plan. The system doesn't have to physically restrain you. It just has to keep you in a mental state where you restrain yourself. Breaking the psychological grip. The first step to breaking this mental control is awareness. Notice when your thoughts are consumed by scarcity. Challenge the belief that having less now means less forever. Question whether your fear is based on fact or on a story you've been told. You can also build resilience practices, learning skills that reduce dependence on controlled systems, building community networks that share resources, practicing gratitude not as denial, but as proof that abundance already exists in your life. Why this matters before we move on. If you don't break the psychological warfare of scarcity, the next parts of this journey won't stick. You might learn how the system works, but still act as if you're trapped because your mind hasn't been freed. In the next part, we'll explore historical precedents, concrete examples across history where scarcity was manufactured, not by accident, but as a deliberate act of power and control. These stories will show you that what's happening now is not new, and that it has always been about control, not necessity.
Historical precedents. When you look at today's headlines, rising food prices, housing shortages, medicine you can't afford, it's easy to think we're living through something unprecedented, but we're not. The truth is, manufactured scarcity is as old as civilization itself. It has been refined, adapted, and repackaged for every era, but the logic remains the same. Control the supply, control the people. Ancient Rome, the bread and grain monopoly. In the Roman Empire, grain was more than food, it was political currency. The state controlled massive grain reserves and used them to influence public behavior. When the people were content, the grain flowed. When unrest brewed, the flow slowed. Wealthy elites also cornered the grain trade, buying up harvests and hoarding them until prices spiked. Then they sold at inflated rates, profiting off the desperation of their fellow citizens. And here's the key. This wasn't framed as manipulation. It was framed as market forces and wise governance. The salt laws of British India. Salt is essential for life. In colonial India, the British government knew this and turned it into a tool of control. Through the salt laws, Indians were forbidden from collecting or selling their own salt. They were forced to buy it from the British at high prices, even when salt deposits were abundant along their own coasts. This law wasn't about conservation, it was about dependence. By controlling salt, the British controlled the daily lives of millions. Mahatma Gandhi's Salt March in 1930 was not just a protest against a tax, it was an act of defiance against an entire system of manufactured scarcity. The Irish Potato Famine, 1845 to 1852. This tragedy is often taught as if it were purely a natural disaster, a blight that destroyed potato crops, leading to mass starvation. But here's the truth left out of most textbooks. During the famine, Ireland was still exporting massive quantities of other foods, beef, grain, butter, to England. There was enough food in the country to prevent starvation, but political and economic structures ensured it flowed out to markets that could pay more rather than to the starving population. Scarcity wasn't just the result of disease, it was the result of decisions. The Great Depression crop destruction, 1930s USA. During the Great Depression, American farmers produced more than the market could afford to buy at profitable prices. Instead of distributing the surplus to the hungry, the U.S. government paid farmers to destroy crops and slaughter livestock. Tens of millions of pounds of food were destroyed, while millions of people stood in bread lines. This was justified as an effort to stabilize the market, but for the hungry, it was proof that economics could trump human need. The Bengal Famine, 1943. In British-ruled India, a famine killed an estimated 3 million people. While drought and crop disease played a role, historians have shown that British wartime policies, including food exportation and the destruction of local rice stocks, intensified the crisis. The British government diverted food to support the war effort, even as reports of mass starvation reached London. Churchill himself infamously blamed the famine on Indians breeding like rabbits, rather than acknowledging policy failures. This was scarcity weaponized as an imperial tool. OPEC oil embargo, 1973. In the 1970s, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, used oil supply as a political weapon, cutting exports to nations that supported Israel during the Yom Kippur War. The result? Skyrocketing oil prices, fuel shortages, and economic turmoil worldwide. This wasn't an accident, it was strategic scarcity. The supply existed, but access was deliberately restricted to achieve political goals. Diamond market control. For decades, the De Beers Company controlled the global diamond supply. They stockpiled gems in massive quantities, releasing them slowly to maintain the illusion of rarity and keep prices artificially high. Diamonds are not as rare as you think. The scarcity is manufactured through careful control of distribution and marketing. The famous slogan, "A diamond is forever," wasn't just romantic, it was an economic strategy. Vaccine patents in modern times. Even in recent years, during global health crises, pharmaceutical companies have used patents to control vaccine production. Despite calls for sharing technology to increase global supply, many firms refused, citing quality control and protection of intellectual property. The result? Slower distribution in poorer nations, prolonged outbreaks, and billions in extra profit for patent holders. Patterns across time. Looking across these examples, a pattern emerges. Identify something essential: food, fuel, medicine, shelter. Gain control over its production or distribution. Limit access, not to conserve, but to create dependence. Use that dependence to extract compliance, profit, or political advantage. The tools change. Laws, monopolies, propaganda, patents, but the principle is the same. Why history matters here. When you understand that manufactured scarcity has always been with us, you stop seeing today's shortages as random misfortunes.
You recognize them as deliberate strategies with long historical roots. And when you see the pattern, you can predict it and resist it. In the next part, we'll focus on the human cost, the real lived consequences of scarcity for individuals, families, and communities. Because behind every policy, every shortage, and every inflated price tag, there's a human story of struggle, and those stories are what make this fight personal.
The human cost. When we talk about scarcity, it's tempting to keep the conversation abstract, to talk about markets, prices, and economic policy. But scarcity is not just an economic theory, it's a lived experience. It's the empty stomach that keeps a child awake at night. It's the eviction notice taped to a family's front door. It's the mother choosing which medicine to buy because she can't afford both. Manufactured scarcity is not just a number on a chart. It is human suffering, designed and distributed. The price of a meal. Imagine a single mother working 2 jobs. She earns just enough to pay rent and keep the lights on. Every week she walks through the grocery store, calculator in hand, weighing each decision. Fresh fruit? Too expensive this week. Meat? Maybe once a month. The shelves are full. The food exists, but for her, it's out of reach. Not because there isn't enough, but because the prices are inflated by a system designed to squeeze every extra dollar from those who can least afford it. For her children, scarcity isn't an economic concept. It's the absence of a proper dinner. Healthcare on hold. In another part of the world, a man sits in a hospital waiting room. He's been told the procedure he needs is limited and must be scheduled months in advance. His condition worsens with every passing week. The truth is, the equipment and specialists exist, but access is bottlenecked by profit-driven policies. Private clinics offer the same treatment immediately, for a price he cannot possibly pay. So he waits and waits and waits. Scarcity doesn't just cost him money, it's costing him his health. The eviction. In a city where there are more empty apartments than homeless people, a family is evicted for missing 2 months' rent. Their landlord could easily keep them there until they recover financially. But scarcity thinking says, if I lower the rent or show leniency, it reduces my property's market value. That night, the family sleeps in their car, within sight of high-rise windows glowing in the dark. Those windows look down on them like silent reminders. There is shelter here, but not for you. The emotional weight of scarcity. Scarcity doesn't just strip away physical comfort. It wears down mental resilience. Stress. Constant worry about bills and survival triggers chronic stress, which is linked to heart disease, weakened immunity, and depression. Shame. People struggling under scarcity often blame themselves, believing they've failed personally, rather than recognizing systemic manipulation. Isolation. When resources feel scarce, people are less likely to share, trust, or cooperate, breaking apart communities. This emotional erosion is part of the design. Desperate, exhausted, isolated people are far less likely to organize and demand change. Children growing up in scarcity. One of scarcity's most devastating impacts is on children. Studies show that growing up in poverty or deprivation shapes brain development, academic performance, and lifelong earning potential. A child who experiences hunger doesn't just miss a meal. They may struggle to focus in school, fall behind academically, and internalize a belief that there's never enough. That belief often carries into adulthood, perpetuating the scarcity mindset for another generation. This is how manufactured scarcity becomes self-reinforcing.
It doesn't just trap individuals, it traps families and entire communities for decades. The global picture. Scarcity's human cost isn't limited to one country or class. In wealthy nations, scarcity shows up as crushing debt, unaffordable housing, and inaccessible health care. In poorer nations, it means malnutrition, preventable disease, and mass displacement. Yet in both contexts, the root is often the same. Resources exist, but access is controlled. The cost in time. Scarcity also steals your most precious resource, time. When wages are low, people work longer hours just to cover basics. This means less time for rest, family, education, and personal growth. Life becomes a loop. Work, recover just enough to work again, repeat. Time that could be used to improve life is instead spent surviving it. Stories from the ground. The farmer. In a developing country, a farmer grows enough food to feed his village, but corporate contracts force him to sell his harvest to an exporter. Locals can't afford to buy it back, so they eat less while their food appears on supermarket shelves thousands of miles away. The student. A talented student receives a university acceptance letter but turns it down because tuition is impossibly high. A scholarship exists, but only a few are granted, keeping the majority in debt or out of school. The worker. In a worker town, a single employer dominates. Workers accept low pay because leaving means losing the only health insurance option in the region. Each of these stories is personal, but together they form a global truth. Scarcity is a lever, and people are the weights on its ends. The invisible death toll. Manufactured scarcity kills quietly. It's the untreated illness, the malnourished child, the stress-induced heart attack, the homeless person who doesn't survive winter. These deaths rarely make headlines because the system doesn't see them as failures. It sees them as costs of doing business. Why this part matters. You cannot fully understand the cruelty of manufactured scarcity until you see its human cost. Numbers can be debated, economic theories can be spun, but a child's hunger, a mother's grief, a worker's exhaustion, these are undeniable truths. And once you feel that truth, it's harder to accept scarcity as just the way things are. In the next part, we'll shift to breaking the scarcity illusion, how to recognize when scarcity is manufactured, and the mental tools you need to start seeing abundance where the system wants you to see only lack. Breaking the scarcity illusion. If you've followed the journey up to now, you've seen how scarcity is manufactured through economics, politics, corporate power, media manipulation, and psychological warfare. You've seen the history. You've felt the human cost. Now comes the most important step, breaking the illusion. Because until you dismantle the scarcity script in your mind, the system will keep running, even if the external barriers are removed. Scarcity begins in the mind. Scarcity is a double-edged sword. On one side, there's the actual restriction of resources. On the other, there's the belief in that restriction. Even when the first side disappears, the second side can remain, and it's just as powerful. Think of prisoners released after decades behind bars. Some find it hard to walk through an open door without asking permission. Their bodies are free, but their minds are still captive. The same is true for you if you've lived under scarcity for long enough. The first step is realizing when your mind is following rules that no longer serve you. Spotting the signs of the illusion. You might still be under the influence of scarcity thinking if you automatically assume there's not enough to go around. You see others' success as your loss. You avoid taking risks because you can't afford to fail. You hold on to things you don't need out of fear you might need them someday. These habits might feel natural, but they're often the residue of deliberate conditioning. The shift from competition to creation. Scarcity teaches you to compete for what's available. Abundance teaches you to create what's missing. When you shift your thinking, you stop fighting over slices of someone else's pie and start baking your own. Example: scarcity mindset. There are only a few good jobs. I have to beat everyone else to get one. Abundance mindset. I can learn skills, build a business, or create opportunities that didn't exist before. The system thrives when you believe opportunities are fixed. It weakens when you realize they can be made. Ask the right questions. To break the illusion, you must learn to question every shortage you're told about. Ask, is this shortage natural or created? Who controls access to this resource? Who benefits from me believing there isn't enough? Is the shortage in the resource itself or in the distribution? These questions pull back the curtain, revealing the levers of control behind the scenes. Finding proof of abundance. The system hides abundance because seeing it would ruin the illusion. Your job is to look for it. Examples you might not notice: food waste in supermarkets, even during food shortages. Entire apartment buildings standing empty in cities with homelessness crises. Medicines that are cheap to produce but sold for hundreds of times their cost. Once you start spotting abundance in the real world, the scarcity story loses its grip. Reclaiming your agency. Scarcity makes you feel powerless. Breaking the illusion means reclaiming your role as an active participant in your life. Learn skills that make you less dependent on gatekeepers. Build networks of mutual aid with people around you. Share resources in ways that bypass corporate chokeholds. When you can meet more of your own needs, even partially, you weaken the leverage the system has over you. From passive consumer to active creator. One of the strongest antidotes to scarcity thinking is creation. Instead of waiting for a job opening, create a service people need. Instead of complaining about the cost of food, grow some of your own. Instead of depending entirely on mainstream news, seek out independent sources. These steps don't require you to opt out of society entirely. They simply make you less vulnerable to its manipulations. The role of community. Scarcity thrives in isolation. When people don't talk to each other, they can't compare notes and see the patterns. Communities can pool resources to lower costs, share skills to reduce dependence on paid services, support each other in resisting unfair practices. Throughout history, collective action has broken scarcity systems, from labor unions to grassroots co-ops. Guarding against the illusion's return. Breaking the scarcity illusion once doesn't mean it's gone forever. The system will keep trying to pull you back in, using fear, media narratives, and sudden crises to make you doubt. That's why you must continually question the source of scarcity claims. Keep reminding yourself of examples where abundance exists. Stay connected to people and projects that operate from an abundance mindset. The psychological liberation. When you truly break the scarcity illusion, something shifts inside you. You stop seeing yourself as a passive receiver of whatever's available and start seeing yourself as a creator, a problem solver, a contributor. This doesn't magically make all shortages disappear, but it changes your relationship with them. You stop feeling like a victim and start acting like a player in the game. Why this matters before we move on? If you don't break the illusion, everything else we discuss will feel impossible. The next steps, building systemic solutions, creating personal resilience, require you to believe that change is possible, that resources can be reimagined, and that abundance is within reach. In the next part, we'll explore systemic solutions, the changes in policy, infrastructure, and culture that could dismantle manufactured scarcity and create a society where access to life's essentials is a right, not a privilege. Systemic solutions.
If scarcity is engineered, it can be dismantled. But dismantling it isn't just about individual action. It's about changing the systems that make scarcity possible in the first place. We can't rely on the same structures that created the problem to fix it for us. We need solutions that shift the incentives, break monopolies, and put access to essentials back into the hands of the people. Principle number 1. Make essentials a right, not a commodity. Food, water, housing, and healthcare are not luxuries. They are the foundation of life. Yet in the current system, they're treated as products to be sold for maximum profit. Systemic shift. Declare these essentials as basic rights in law. Ensure public funding and infrastructure for universal access. Prevent corporations from monopolizing life-sustaining resources. Example: in some countries have enshrined the right to water in their constitutions, making it illegal to cut off supply to households unable to pay. This flips the power dynamic from "you must afford it" to "you are entitled to it." Principle number 2. Break monopolies and encourage competition. Manufactured scarcity thrives where a few players dominate a market. Breaking those chokeholds means introducing genuine competition or replacing monopolies with public alternatives. Systemic shift. Enforce antitrust laws to dismantle corporations that control too much of one resource. Create public options for essential services so people aren't trapped with one provider. Encourage cooperative business models where ownership and profit are shared between workers and communities. Example: in regions where public broadband services compete with private providers, internet speeds increase and prices drop because the monopoly is broken. Principle number 3. Reform intellectual property for public good. Patents are meant to encourage innovation, but in practice, they often block access to life-saving technology. Systemic shift. Shorten patent durations for essential medicines. Create open-source licensing for critical technologies. Use government funding for research with the condition that results remain public property. Example: during health crises, some countries have overridden patents to produce affordable generic drugs locally, saving countless lives. Principle number 4. Redesign agricultural and food systems. Food scarcity is rarely about production, it's about distribution and waste. Systemic shift. Invest in local and regional food networks to reduce dependence on global supply chains. Ban the destruction of edible food for market reasons. Provide incentives for supermarkets and restaurants to donate surplus. Example: in France, it's made it illegal for supermarkets to throw away unsold edible food, requiring them to donate it to charities. Principle number 5. Build housing for need, not for speculation. Housing shortages are often the result of treating homes as investments rather than shelter. Systemic shift. Tax vacant properties to discourage speculation. Extend social housing programs with mixed-income communities. Streamline building permits for affordable housing projects while closing loopholes for luxury developments. Example: in Vienna, Austria, over 60% of residents live in city-supported housing, keeping rent stable for decades. Principle number 6. Increase transparency and public oversight. Scarcity thrives in the shadows. Public oversight can expose and prevent artificial shortages. Systemic shift. Require companies to publicly disclose inventory levels, production capacity, and waste. Create independent watchdog agencies with real enforcement power. Mandate open data on resource availability for essential goods and services. Example: open data platforms in some cities allow residents to track water supply levels in real time, preventing misinformation and panic buying. Principle number 7. Decentralize resource control. Centralized control makes it easy for a small group to limit access.
Decentralizing production and distribution makes scarcity harder to manufacture. Systemic shift. Promote renewable energy microgrids owned by local communities. Support local manufacturing and 3D printing hubs. Encourage urban agriculture and community gardens. Example: in parts of Africa, solar-powered microgrids run by cooperatives provide electricity to villages without dependence on national utilities. Principle number 8, educate for abundance thinking. We can change the laws, but if people still believe scarcity is inevitable, the cycle will return. Education must reframe the way future generations see resources. Systemic shift. Teach cooperative economics alongside competitive models. Include critical media literacy in school curriculums to help students question scarcity narratives. Highlight examples of abundance-based solutions in history and current events. Principle number 9, build resilient supply chains. Over-reliance on fragile supply chains makes it easy to create artificial shortages through disruption. Systemic shift. Diversify sourcing for essential goods. Maintain strategic reserves of critical materials. Support domestic production capacity for key items like medicine and food. Example: in some countries, keep grain reserves large enough to feed the entire population for months, buffering against market manipulation. Principle number 10, embed accountability into governance. Policies mean nothing without enforcement. Gatekeepers must face real consequences for manufacturing scarcity. Systemic shift. Criminalize deliberate destruction of essential goods. Penalize price gouging with heavy fines or loss of business licenses. Protect whistleblowers who expose scarcity manipulation. Why systemic solutions matter. Individual action is powerful for breaking personal dependence, but only systemic change can prevent scarcity from being rebuilt on a mass scale. The goal is not just to make life slightly better for some people. The goal is to create a society where manufactured scarcity is impossible because the incentives and structures that sustain it have been dismantled. In the next part, we'll turn to personal strategies for freedom, practical steps you can take right now to reduce your vulnerability to scarcity, even before the system changes. This is where systemic vision meets individual action. Personal strategies for freedom. Systemic change is essential, but it's also slow. Laws take years to change. Policies can be blocked. Political will can shift overnight. That's why your freedom from scarcity cannot wait for the system to fix itself. You need to start building your own resilience now. These strategies won't make you immune to every shortage, but they will make you harder to control, less desperate, and more capable of weathering whatever the scarcity system throws at you. 1. Build multiple streams of income. Scarcity thrives when you rely on a single paycheck. One employer can cut hours, freeze wages, or fire you, and suddenly you're in crisis. Action steps. Start a side business, even if it's small. Use online platforms to sell skills or products. Learn freelance or contract-based work to diversify your income. When your livelihood comes from multiple sources, no single gatekeeper has complete control over you. 2. Learn skills that reduce dependence. The less you rely on the market for every need, the less power scarcity has over you. Action steps. Learn basic cooking to avoid dependence on expensive prepared foods. Learn basic repair skills for clothing, electronics, and home items. Practice urban gardening or small-scale food growing. Every skill you gain is one less opportunity for the scarcity system to profit from you. 3. Build a personal emergency reserve. Scarcity thrives on urgency. If you have no reserves of money, food, or essentials, any disruption becomes a crisis. Action steps. Save a small percentage of each paycheck, even if it's modest. Keep a stock of non-perishable foods and essential supplies for 1 to 3 months. Store a small emergency cash fund outside the banking system in case of disruptions. This isn't about hoarding, it's about giving yourself breathing room to make better decisions. 4. Create and join mutual aid networks. One of the most powerful antidotes to scarcity is community cooperation. Action steps. Connect with neighbors to share tools, skills, and resources. Join or start a community garden, co-op, or skill-sharing group. Organize swap meets to exchange goods without money changing hands. The scarcity system wants you isolated. Mutual aid reconnects you and makes everyone stronger. 5. Control your information diet. Media thrives on scarcity fear. If you consume it without filter, you'll constantly feel powerless. Action steps. Limit exposure to fear-driven headlines. Follow independent journalists and researchers who provide full context. Verify claims of shortages before acting on them. An informed mind is harder to manipulate. 6. Reduce debt and avoid predatory credit. Debt is one of scarcity's sharpest tools. It keeps you locked in constant repayment, limiting your freedom to act. Action steps. Pay off high-interest debt first. Avoid payday loans or credit traps. Build credit for emergencies, but treat it as a last resort, not a lifeline. The less debt you have, the less the system can leverage financial scarcity against you. 7. Practice delayed gratification. Scarcity pushes you toward instant relief, even if it's costly in the long run. Action steps. Pause 24 to 48 hours before any major purchase. Ask yourself if it solves a real need or a manufactured desire. Save for big purchases instead of financing them. This habit protects you from impulse spending driven by scarcity marketing. 8. Develop portable skills and assets. Scarcity often traps people by limiting mobility, making it hard to leave a bad job, city, or country. Action steps. Learn skills that are in demand globally, not just locally. Keep essential documents and assets organized for quick relocation if needed. Build an online presence or portfolio that isn't tied to one employer or location. Mobility is freedom, and the scarcity system hates it. 9. Invest in abundance-minded projects. Support systems and initiatives that bypass scarcity altogether. Action steps. Fund or join co-ops, community-owned energy projects, or open-source ventures. Buy from ethical producers who don't destroy surplus to control prices. Share knowledge freely whenever you can. Every time you put resources into abundance, you weaken the grip of scarcity. 10. Protect your mental resilience. Breaking scarcity isn't just financial, it's psychological. Action steps. Practice mindfulness or meditation to keep fear in check. Surround yourself with people who see possibility, not just limits. Celebrate small wins to reinforce an abundance mindset. Mental resilience is the foundation that keeps all other strategies strong. From survival to strategy. Many of these steps start small, but over time they build a shield made of skills, community, knowledge, and resources. The goal is not to escape society, but to become less dependent on the systems that thrive on keeping you desperate. In the next part, we'll bring everything together in the call to action, a rallying point for individuals and communities to stand against manufactured scarcity and build a world based on enough for all. We've traveled a long road together, from the opening shock that scarcity is often manufactured, to the layers of control, economic, political, corporate, psychological, to the history that proves this is not new, to the human cost that makes it impossible to ignore, to the solutions, both systemic and personal, that can break the cycle. Now, there's only one question left. What will you do with this knowledge? Understanding is not enough. Knowledge alone changes nothing. History is filled with people who knew the truth and did nothing, and the system survived stronger than ever. The scarcity script is written to make you believe you are powerless, that your choices don't matter, that the problem is too big. And that's the final illusion we have to destroy, the belief that change is someone else's job. The power of small actions. Every great shift in history began with small, deliberate acts. A worker refusing unfair pay, a community starting a co-op, a citizen asking one hard question at the right time. You don't have to overthrow the system tomorrow, but you do have to start today. Your personal mission. Here's what breaking the scarcity script looks like in your life. See through the illusion. Question every claim of not enough. Refuse to play zero-sum games. Collaborate instead of compete where possible. Withdraw your consent from systems that profit from artificial shortages. Create alternatives, even on a small scale, to show abundance is possible. Every action that reduces your dependence on manufactured scarcity chips away at its power. From me to we. Individual action is vital, but collective action is unstoppable. When people connect, share resources, and coordinate strategies, scarcity loses its sharpest weapon, isolation. Imagine neighborhoods with shared gardens and tool libraries, workers forming unions to demand fair wages, consumers boycotting companies that destroy surplus, citizens lobbying for policies that treat essentials as rights, not commodities. The system is designed to keep you apart. Breaking scarcity means coming together. Expect resistance. The forces that profit from scarcity will not cheer your efforts. They will mock your ideas as unrealistic. They will use fear to pull you back into dependence. They will offer temporary relief to keep you compliant. That's proof you're on the right path. Every system resists change until it loses control. Protect your mind. As you act, remember scarcity is as much a mental battlefield as it is a physical one. Guard yourself against the constant drip of fear-based messaging. Seek stories of abundance, resilience, and cooperation. Surround yourself with people who believe change is possible, because their belief will fuel yours. A vision worth fighting for. Picture a world where no child goes hungry while warehouses overflow with food. No one sleeps on the street while apartments stand empty. Medicines are shared freely because health is valued above profit. Communities produce and share their own energy, food, and knowledge. This is not utopia. It's simply a world where abundance is allowed to flow. It's possible, and it starts with people like you deciding that enough for all is worth fighting for. The final step: choose your first move. Don't let this be just another piece of information you consume and forget. Choose one action you can take this week. Start a conversation with a friend about manufactured scarcity. Join a local group working on food security, housing rights, or cooperative economics. Learn a new skill that makes you less dependent on gatekeepers. Support a policy or campaign that expands access to essentials. Change begins the moment you move from awareness to action. The truth that can't be untold. Once you see the scarcity script, you can't unsee it. Once you know abundance exists, you can't pretend it doesn't. The choice now is whether you'll live differently and help others see the truth for themselves. You have the knowledge, you have the power, and now you have the responsibility. The world has enough for everyone's need, but not for everyone's greed. It's time to stop playing the role the system wrote for you and start writing your own.